welcome everybody. As you know, we've been talking about lamentation and celebration. We've been focusing a little bit more on the lamentation part. That is where we tend to go in Lent. That's kind of the directive of Lent. But as Felicia has reminded us, every Sunday in Lent is actually the 40 days or the 40 days, but the Sundays we take off, right? And that's true also with folks in our Jewish neighborhoods, that whatever's going on, whatever lamenting is going on, Shabbat is reserved for something else. So that's a good reminder for all of us that there is celebration and joy woven into even the darkest moments of despair. Oh, and I apologize for the sunglasses. I'm not trying to be a movie star. Please ask me if I was. I'm not. I apologize. I'm having some light sensitivity today. And that reminded me too of what we talked about 2 weeks ago, that darkness is sometimes really good and healing. So for me, I need a little darkness today. So can you all hear me online okay? Perfect. Yes. We are going to work today with the work of a woman named Valerie Kaur. She has changed our lives. This book came out in 2020. I don't know if you can see it. It's called See No Stranger, a Memoir and Manifesto of Revolutionary Love. I read it in the summer. It came out in the summer. And you remember the summer of 2020 was super intense with COVID, and also George Floyd's murder, other things that really brought much more in our awareness the tragedies that a lot of our brothers and sisters face. And I finished the last page, and then, much to Raven's delight, said, "Okay, you have to read this with me." So we turned to page 1 and read it aloud together. And we're going to listen to Valerie in just a moment. She has an interview. I think we have a 10-minute interview that she's in, but I wanted to make sure you have this. She developed this system. It's a series of practices for helping us to love one another. And as you'll hear, love, she means as really fierce action, not just love as kind of a gooey, happy feeling for each other. But the way this works is like a compass. So if you're really in a place where you need to love yourself more, love ourselves, you would face the compass outwards in a way that ourselves would be again away from you. Okay? Say you need to love your opponent more. You're working with that, which is a super tricky area. You would face opponents away from you. Does that make sense? And then in each of those, you'll see this circle. So let's work with opponents for just a second. So move opponents away from you. Tending the wound is what she calls those groups of practices. Tending the wound for working with our opponents. And that might seem really odd. We'll dip into whose wound and how we tend it. But these 3 blue practices in this case are the actions we take. And we always start with the center one. The center one, the smallest circle, those practices are ones that we do with ourselves. So for instance, with opponents, we give ourselves space and the tools to rage, to feel our own rage, to not shove it aside in the work of loving our opponents. The second larger circle is an interpersonal action, right? So after we've worked with our own rage, then listen. How do we listen to our opponents? And the third largest circle is a collective. So with the opponents, how do we reimagine a different world, right? And this for me has been a guide. I'm not super wonderfully easy. I don't have a lot of ease with it yet, but this year in particular, when we're having a lot of really challenging discussions on a large scale, for me to first feel my rage. What am I angry about? And then can I really listen? Can I really listen to somebody who thinks differently than I? And then together, can we reimagine? And I'll just say, most of you know that we had some challenges, especially our vestry and our wonderful leadership within our faith partnership in the past year, right? And I think that involved a lot of people feeling what they felt, getting upset, and talking to each other and feeling heard, but then really deeply listening to people who thought differently than they, and then reimagining together what can we do from this place. So this actually works whether we know it or not. Yeah, I don't know if y'all knew you were working with this. So Valerie wrote the whole book, and it's interwoven. It's the subtitle is A Memoir and Manifesto of Revolutionary Love. And it's exactly those two things. So the manifesto is this is how you do it. But the memoir part is, she's a sick practitioner from her childhood, from her family. And she weaves her family stories and her heritage stories throughout this book, which was so lovely for us to read. So she wrote the whole book, went through all her journals from years and years and wrote the book, and then went into active labor with her second child, the second really that she finished, kind of a complete draft. So the epilogue is all about joy, which her daughter's name is Ananda, joy in Sanskrit. And so Raven's going to read to you a little passage which she writes about joy. So she adds to this. Sometimes you'll see it, a little joy circle over here, but it really shouldn't even be a circle. Joy, imagine like that joy is woven throughout the whole piece. So Raven, a little here.
Joy is possible even amid great labors, the labor of dying, the labor of birthing, and the labors between. We cannot force it, but when we create moments to breathe between labor pains and surrender our senses to the present moment, notice the colors and light and feelings of being alive, here, together, joy comes more easily. It is a felt sense in our bodies. In the face of horrors visited upon our world daily, in the struggle to protect our loved ones, choosing to let in joy is a revolutionary act. Joy returns us to everything good and beautiful and worth fighting for. It gives us energy for the long labor. Letting in joy, therefore, is the 10th practice of revolutionary love, the core practice that sustains all the others. Joy is the gift of love. It makes the labor an end in itself. I believe laboring in joy is the meaning of life. May we look up at the night sky. May we let joy in. For we will be someone's ancestor one day. If we do this right, they will inherit not our fear, but bravery born of joy.
So we'll listen to Valerie for a little bit, and then we'll have a discussion. And at the end, we'll do one of the practices. I'll lead us through one of the practices. Okay. Any questions before we do the video?
So anytime anyone ever said that love was the answer, I would always roll my eyes. Like, I'm a lawyer, I care about strategy. The problem is not with love, but the way that we talk about love. That love is more than a rush of feeling. We tend to talk about love as something that happens to us. We fall in love. But if we think about love just as emotion, then of course love is too fickle, too sentimental, too anemic to be a force for justice in the world. Then we think about our strongest relationships in life, between parents and students, between children and their grown-ups, their caretakers, between educators and their young people in the classroom. These relationships are defined by sustained and practical care. And so I began to redefine love, not as a rush of feeling, but as a form of sweet labor. Fierce, bloody, imperfect, life-giving, a choice that we make over and over again. And if love is sweet labor, then love can be taught, love can be modeled, and love can be practiced. And it's not just any one feeling, right? It's all of the emotions. So joy is the gift of love. Grief is the price of love. Anger is the force that protects that which is loved. And when we think we have reached our limits, then wonder is the act that returns us to love. What I call revolutionary love is the choice to enter into labor for others who do not look like us, for our opponents, people who hurt us, and for ourselves. So how do we love others? I call this practice see no stranger. We know that all of our wisdom traditions teach us that we are interdependent and interconnected, that it is possible to look upon the face of anyone around us and say in our minds, you are a part of me that I do not yet know. And yet brain imaging studies show us that our minds divide the world into us and them in an instant. And who we see as one of us determines who we feel empathy for, or who we feel compassion for, who we stand up for in the streets or at the polls, who we advocate for in the classroom. And so what might it mean to train our minds, train our eyes to see no stranger? It is the ability to look upon the face of anyone and think, sister, brother, sibling, we are part of one another. We belong to one another. I will draw close to your story. I will let your story change me. I will let your grief into my heart. I will fight for you when you are in harm's way. And so wondering and grieving and fighting is how we practice seeing no stranger. This brings me to the second practice. Like, how do we fight even our opponents with love? So the second practice is called tend the wound. It is very tempting to think about our opponents as evil, but I've come to believe that there is no such thing as monsters in this world, only people who are wounded, people whose insecurity or pain or blindness or greed make them able to be complicit in systems of oppression that cause them to pull the trigger or cast the vote or pass the policy aimed at us. But if we listen to even their stories, beneath the slogans and beneath the sound bites, we begin to hear their pain and understand that they too are wounded. Our wounds are not morally equivalent. But once we begin to see the suffering, even our opponents, we can listen to their stories. We gather information for how to change the cultures and the institutions of power that allow them to hurt us. See, loving our opponents is not just moral, it is pragmatic, it is strategic, it is how we engage in institutional change. And I believe that we can teach our young people how to tend to the wounds in people who they see as enemies or who they see as opponents. Seeing their humanity is how we practice loving them and how we start to reimagine the world in such a way that liberates our opponents too. But I have to remind you that everybody has a different role in the fight. If you are directly in harm's way right now, as so many people of color are, our job is to tend to our own wounds first and let others do that labor of reaching out to our opponents. That's why we're a community, that's why we're a movement. And this brings me to the third practice, how to love ourselves. I call this breathe and push. So our social justice leaders from Gandhi to King to Mandela, they taught us a lot about how to love others and love our opponents. They didn't teach us too much about how to love ourselves. This is a feminist intervention. Audre Lorde, this is Bell Hooks. These are women who have taught us that loving ourselves is not a form of indulgence, but a form of political warfare. For too long have women, and specifically women of color, been taught to suppress their rage and grief in the name of love and forgiveness. But we cannot let the movement happen on our backs or over our dead bodies. We need to be able to pour into ourselves the kind of love that we pour out into the world. And so that's why I'm so drawn by the wisdom of the midwife, in all of our labors, the labor of raising a family or teaching students in a classroom or making a movement or rebirthing a nation. In all of our labors, we need to be breathing in order to be pushing. And the midwife doesn't say breathe once and push the rest of the way, right? She says breathe and push and breathe again. So how can we teach ourselves and teach our children how to integrate breathing into their lives so that they're caring for themselves even as they care for others? You see, I believe we need all three forms, all three practices of love for love to be revolutionary. For loving just ourselves is a form of escapism, and loving just our opponents is a form of self-loathing, and loving just others is ineffective. That's where so many of us are right now. We need to be creating communities of care so that we're pouring that care into ourselves. And at the same time, we cannot become what we are fighting. We cannot become the ones we are resisting. How do we fight even our most serious opponents with the ethic of love? We need to be modeling a new way. And this is why I believe that revolutionary love is the call of our times.
So we just heard her say that joy is the gift of love and grief is the price of love. And that anger is the force that protects that which we love. Wonder is the act that returns us back to love. Can you describe a time when you've experienced grief as the price of your love? Have you experienced grief as the price of your love?
I think for me, the story that comes to mind is when I was in Lander and working on the Indian reservation. And so we had the idea that we would have a Martin Luther King march that would include all the folks who were in these populations that have been oppressed and excluded and so on. And so the Arapaho and the Shoshone were going to march in the parade, and we wanted also to have an LGBTQ plus component. And the Arapaho and Shoshone talked to those of us who wanted the gay and lesbian, etc. component and said, we won't march if you are part of that march. And so out of love, we decided that we would step aside. But it's still, as you can help the state, causes grief.
Did they give reason why?
Because they didn't feel like we were a culture. They didn't feel like we had a culture. And they felt that for many of them, there was a real strong sentiment against the different aspects of that population. Yeah, so that was just not something that they were willing or ready to reach out and do. The Arapaho in particular are Catholic are Catholic and also Episcopal people. But they were taught in this very conservative way, and they really glommed onto that to the point that, well, anyway, that's a long time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, Lori, thank you for sharing that.
I hope it's changed.
I hope it's changing now.
When we lose a loved one, I mean, that's always, there's always grief. And the more love, the deeper the grief.
Yeah. Our beloved cat Angus, we always have pets with short lives because Grace has strong allergies to cats and dogs. And every time one of them dies, we always say, never again, we're not getting another one. Because at the moment, it feels like the price is too big, right? But then, of course, we fall in love again with people and critters.
Yes.
Yeah, but it does feel like that's just part of the package, right? If we agree to love, somebody's gonna be.
You know, I had a very good friend when I lived in Lexington, Kentucky, and, you know, she lived across the street, and she was the kindest person in the whole, you know, city, I think. And so all of a sudden she just had this aneurysm and died. And I didn't even realize how much my daughter loved her too. And so she, you know, when we had the funeral, she said, I have to go, Mom, to her funeral, because she loved everybody. But you know, I wouldn't want to miss having had that love, but it's even now, you know, I still miss her so much.
I can feel it.
I have a different one, which has to do with nature. And back east, we lived in a neighborhood which had a lot of animals, different kinds of animals coming through, birds, rodents, turtles, all kinds of things. And I remember walking one morning and looking down into a ditch, and there was a fox, and it couldn't move. Obviously had been hit by a car, knocked off into the ditch, and it was alive. And I stood there and cried for, I don't know how long. People, I know neighbors went walking by, why are you crying? I said, because that fox is dying. And I love all the wildlife we have here. And so finally someone called 911 and had a trooper or a policeman come along and shoot it. But I suffered that day watching this, because this was a beautiful creature and deserved to live much longer. And whoever hit it never stopped, obviously, which often happens. But I was surprised at the strength of my grief that was so deep. And I feel that way every time I see a bird or just about any kind of creature that's been run over or hurt in some way. It just pains me terribly because I love them so much.
Thank you, Terry. And that's such a good reminder to me of how we don't have to have been in relationship to feel that grief. Yeah. Have you ever had the experience of allowing or being surprised by wonder returning you to love when you've been in any of these rage or grief, where a sense of wonder can just bring your focus back to love?
Amy,
Yes.
I've been thinking of neighbors during this discussion, and I've recently had 2 sets of neighbors move away that have been neighbors for 45 years, and we've grown very close. And there was a lot of grief for both of us as they moved away, and we're talking East Coast away. So, we're not going to see each other very much except via FaceTime. So I was reluctant as new neighbors moved in to, what step do I take? Do I open myself to starting a relationship that's going to cause perhaps loss at the end? How long will these people stay? And I struggled with this for a while. And then I just decided these could be great friends, could be great people, and reached out to both of them, and have since am very blessed with having new friends and having that joy that has come out of the loss. The loss is still there, but there's also joy and an opening to what could be. So I think that's an example.
That's a beautiful example. Thank you, Carol. Thank you.
I feel like there's some kind of acceptance in it, because I hadn't heard it phrased exactly that way, that grief is the price of love. Like I guess I think about it as like, this is the form that love is taking at this moment, and that all those emotions, like, if I, as a parent, if I see my child, like sometimes that love is going to take the form of anger to protect, or grief at a loss. And so it's just love, like shifting shapes all the time. But I think that's such an interesting point, like coming out of these stories, that we don't really have a choice about the loving part, because whether we want to or not, we even get surprised by something we didn't know we had a connection with before. So for me, it's like that, just a deep type of acceptance. Like, I'm built to love, so I am going to shift through all these, or maybe be overwhelmed by these different emotions at different times.
Yeah. Or how about this idea of loving our opponents? That's a tough one, right? I mean, and not some, like I said before, and she says, love is not just this feeling. How do we actively love them? Have you been able to do that with person or a situation, a group of people, to truly love them, even as you maybe fight to protect another thing you love that they might be in opposition to.
I struggle for acceptance, even if I never get to love, you know. You might not ever get to the love part, but you now just accept them for who they are. Is that, I don't know where that is in the trajectory. Halfway, getting close.
I think it's probably in the listen part, right?
Probably.
Because a lot of times I don't open myself up to even listen, right? I don't want to know why they are doing this thing. I think when we listen, we're opening up to allow ourselves, you know, to be a little bit changed, our thoughts maybe to be changed by what they have to say.
You know, sometimes I don't even realize I need to listen. Then something might remind me, and then, oh, wow, it changes a lot when you listen.
Yeah, I feel like I was looking at the opponent one, and I had a recent work experience where I feel like, wow, I went right through all those things right there. Because someone did something that really offended me and made me very, very angry. And then, but I was certainly shut down in the moment for a little bit there. But then as I listened over the next few weeks, you know, I realized that this person was going through a tremendous amount of loss with their spouse being really ill and their father dying, just like falling right on the heels of, you know, their spouse's father dying. Like, and I got, okay, I mean, I can feel how that is really difficult to like not allow that to impact the way that you respond to people in like work situations and other situations that are outside of it. And really just kind of was able to do just kind of a reset, you know, like a reimagining of what that was like for them to be having to deal with work issues while all of that stuff was going on, and really kind of just got back to the feeling of openness that I had for that person before. So. It was definitely like, excuse me.
Can you talk more about reimagining?
Well, for me, that took two forms, right? One of them was to speak to that person and tell them why, what they had done that had really offended me. So I did that piece in there. And I do feel like they responded back. You know, we kind of had a conversation, we kind of had a back and forth about how this was, you know, an unfortunate set of circumstances and tensions and that kind of stuff, and that we could work, you know, just kind of reset back to what we were doing before, which was good. So I think it's that. I like some communication, if it's possible, I think is how you reimagine that stuff. For me, like I will try and go through it without ever talking to them. But it doesn't. I don't think it goes, you know, to a place of really being able to kind of reset emotionally. Like I can get there intellectually, like I can understand why they did the thing they did, right? And come to a place of kind of intellectual equanimity around it. But I don't think if without re-engaging in some way, I don't think we get back to a, you know, truly kind of felt, like she says, a felt sense of joy around that relationship.
May I jump in?
Yeah.
As someone who witnessed that, I was not involved in that. The reimagining, I would say it happened on several planes for you, or you worked it for several planes, that you reimagined how together, how you could be in relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You're both not the most communicative about your emotions of people in the world. And so you reimagined together, okay, maybe we should touch base a little bit more.
Yeah, that's true.
And I would say you also, tell me if this is correct, but you also, part of that was reimagining for yourself how to be in relationship with people in work,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it was about this particular person, but it was also about you and about
in general, work relationships.
Yeah.
We do say that's true.
I'd say that's definitely true. Yeah. And I think, I think we can use, I kind of managed to do it this time, and I certainly don't manage to do it all the time, but we can kind of use this, to see the inside part too, right? Is that like, I still have a lot of grief around this person that I'm talking about is a senior to me. So this manages the team that manages part of the organization that I'm under. Okay. And I realized in that, like, having this experience is also helping me like finish working through the grief I had about the person who was previously managing this part of the organization was the best manager I ever had, and was just like an incredible person, and got laid off as part of the merger stuff that happened. And so I still had and I knew this, worked through a lot of grief around that, and really tried to acknowledge it. But this really kind of brought up for me, oh yeah, there's still some places that this is extra hard, because I know this entire situation wouldn't arise from before. And so like kind of allowing that to pull up other pieces.
I think that a hard part is being able to tend the wound, even if the barbed wire fence has been put up around. You can't reimagine with me. I'm sorry, I'm not letting you in. And it's a barbed wire fence. And navigating through that to still love a person who I acknowledge has to have some deep wounds. And I will never get there with that person, but I still need to just love that person, acknowledging that that person needs love and mine.
And I think I want to talk on that, if that's okay, Jen. And that's to say that a lot of times, especially as women, we get in this place of, oh, I should forgive, when someone is really doing damage or harm. And so I think the barbed wire fence image is a perfect one, because you can still see through that barbed wire to the other person, but you don't have to let them hurt you again. So, and that's important. That's part of that loving yourself piece, that there's some people we can't afford to let in that far.
I guess when we started, I was thinking of reimagining, like, wouldn't it be great if my opponent and I could sit down and we can imagine like a world that takes care of these needs and others, but it sounds like reimagining might sometimes just happen on my part as well.
I think so. For sure.
I do think, even like being a rather mental person, it's like sometimes the reimagine it may not be possible to engage with the opponent again in that way. But by going through the motions in my mind to really like list for myself, this person had this, they had this, they had this, like to list their wounds that I'm aware of just as a point of mind awareness going forward, right? Whenever I encounter other people, to remember, oh, they probably have something like stuff going on in their lives that has nothing to do with me, that is kind of stop feeling like it should have something to do. To get out of this kind of self-focused part of it.
I'm taking a deep dive in Valerie Kaur right now. I'm in the midst of listening to audiobook of See No Stranger, and that takes me in a lot of directions. And so I'm watching a video right now, and I have done it in piecemeal, of her sitting next to the brother of the man that was killed after 9/11, a Sikh practitioner. They are having a conversation with the man who killed his brother in jail, in prison. And I've had to start it and stop it because of my own emotion. And I'm just watching. It's like,
how can she do this? And so the difficulty, I acknowledge the difficulty of tending the wound. And yet it's what we're called to. I believe strongly.
Yeah, I think, for me too, I think that's why I have to read the book so many times. Because Valerie is not somebody who's just talking from a distance about things we should do, right? In this book, she sits with people who have lost loved ones the moment after they've lost their loved ones to violence against people of color. And she also experiences sexual assault from a family member, and she goes through that pain in the book, and having a truth and reconciliation ceremony with that person eventually, right? And so she's walking the talk, right? Which is so important for me to know that this is hard. This is so hard for everybody, and but there are people out there, you know. And when she's talking about all of this forgiveness, it's not some light thing, you know. I love our gospel reading from today, right? About this fierce protection of something Jesus loves. That's what he was doing in that moment, you know. And when I was young, I couldn't get that. I thought, I'm supposed to be nice, but look at him. He wasn't nice. He did this thing, right? But I think this is such a good example of fierceness and rage. Yeah.
Nice wasn't in the commandment.
Nice.
Or the Beatitudes.
Yeah.
Sweet. Truth, love, yes.
I'm wondering about strangers. And I want to kind of flip it, maybe the question. Well, I'll ask you, you can take it any way you like. So is there somebody right now who is a stranger who seems other to you? It could be a group of people or an individual who you would like to practice not seeing as a stranger, seeing as your sibling you don't know yet. So if that works for you.
What
And
about your sibling?
that is a very good one. A sibling you'd like to know. And or have you felt othered by somebody? Have you felt just somebody doesn't know you, but they're not trying to see you as a sibling?
It brings to mind what I was thinking of, which fits the stranger thing. Because for years in my career, I worked with kids who were disabled one way or another. And the ones that hurt the most, I guess, were kids who'd been abused and were acting out because of that and all that kind of thing, and trying to reach them, or were being not cared for in one way or another. And it was not easy. It brought, often, not every kid, obviously, there were lots of wonderful parents, but there were parents who obviously had been damaged themselves. And you've all heard how that can be in a family. And to see them as people and so it became part of my practice to always visit with families. And not a necessary, there was nothing the school board said this was good, bad, or indifferent. They just, it's your time, you manage. And fortunately, it was early on when we were dealing with kids with disabilities. And so there weren't the strict rules, which was a blessing to me. But finding, I'll never forget John's parents who said that John was God's punishment to them because they must have done something evil in their early lives. And and John was, mentally handicapped, and but physically he was okay. And they fed him because he was their burden to bear. And I was able to get to be friends with that couple as I talked about God and would God do, John is a lovable kiddo, and would God, that's not God, that's not one of the words I used, obviously. And it was over, fortunately, I had John for about 4 years. And so we were able to come to understand, but it helped me also with, like the kid who came to school all beaten. And I knew, you know, you were supposed to be able to, you had to, I mean, it was a law that you had to report it. But the parents would know where it came from, obviously. Kid came to school in the summer with a coat zipped up to here and those kind of things, so you knew. And, but I never got to meet those parents and know why that was going on. And then the little kid who, 5-year-old, signing up for kindergarten, took out on a busy road just running. And a friend of mine who was a lot more agile than I caught him before he got into traffic. And he said, "Let go of me, you fucking bitch." It was a 5-year-old. And you can only imagine where he lived. And so there was a host of people, if you will, not host. I did this job for quite a while, but it always felt like a host of people who I could hate for how they were treating their children. And so learning or coming to understand that didn't help anything. That didn't help a thing in the world, let alone the kids. And so the kid who would not eat anything but pizza. And I finally had a conversation with the mom. She said, "I don't know how to cook anything." Oh, well, all right, we can deal with that. And, but it was the connection. She was a single mom, so she was more willing than some people to have a conversation with me. So that was the thing you mentioned, the strangers who are out there in my world, hurting the people that I cared about, loved, and was working with every day. And it was easy to blame them, hate them, think bad things about them, but it was not helpful. And so at times I could see them through a barbed wire fence. At times there was a iron wall, and so I tried to, when possible, meet them. If it was talking through a fence or getting to the point they would open the door, either one. So but it took a lot of this reimagining to when you're dealing with strangers, and it was like a second hand. They weren't hating me, well, some of them did, but in general, it was because of the way they were dealing with the children.
Wow, that's inspiring. Thank you.
Well, yeah.
I'm sure it was a practice. Yeah, and that brings up what she says about this is pragmatic. For you, it was pragmatic.
It was pragmatic. But it has expanded now that I'm retired and we travel. It makes me smile at and love each of the people I see, whether I know them or not, because I'm comfortable loving strangers. And that I don't know what that does, but it was the same way when I was working with the kids. I didn't always know what the result was going to be, but it didn't help to hate them. It only helped to try to love them for who they were and where they had, as you talked about, Reagan, where they had been before they came into my life.
We're going to practice in just a minute, but before we do, I wanted to talk about loving ourselves. I think all of us who have talked about this word before really are inspired by this breathe and push directive that I think in our culture we're taught we're pushing almost all the time, or we're breathing, right? We push all the time and then we get to be done and then we get to relax, right? But this ebb and flow of breathing and pushing and really that taking a break isn't just a nice thing if you could make it happen. It's absolutely necessary. And she brings up creating communities of care, which I think is so important because I think it's really hard individually. This whole self-care, I mean, it's a movement, it's a whole big sector of our economy, but we can't do it on our own, right? If we're on a team, we're in a family, if we are at work, we need support to help ourselves care for ourselves. So I wonder, where are you at with all of that? with loving yourself.
What is the transition piece in that quadrant or that part?
So she's talking about when you're transitioning to birth.
Oh, okay.
Right, breathe and push. And so transition is then when you are in a place loving yourself so that you maybe can do the next thing. So in a practical way, it might be a project, but it might also be if you're going through a challenging situation. We'll transition to another state of awareness about it, but first we have to go through the breathing and pushing. Thank you.
What was the question?
Where are you at with self-care, Felicia? I'll put you on the spot.
Well, I've just realized that self-care is not a pedicure. Or a massage. Most recently, self-care has been for me, 2 weeks ago, and I emailed about, but this is Amy. I had to grieve. And it's all because of what I was taking in and watching the war. And I stopped myself from grieving because I said, I don't know anyone over there that's being killed. But we are connected. We are one. And when I finally allowed myself, and it was like a full 2 days to cry and to grieve what was happening, that was self-care. Because without it, I just kept being busy, and my activity was, I don't think, near as helpful as it is, once I allowed myself to do that. Self-care looks different. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
I don't think we teach self-care. But I think we're getting better at teaching it. And because I tried to teach it to my daughters. And I have gotten much better with self-care as I've aged. Much. Oh my gosh. And I think age is good. I think that's one of the good things about aging. I mean, there are a lot of good things about aging. Really, there are. And I think self-care is one of them.
You have to. You'll die. I mean, you'll die sooner than you would have.
But your experience has taught you that it's a big payoff. I think getting old is great.
Yeah, it's better for me than it was when I was young.
Me too.
With passing my 80th birthday, and the old do-it-yourself kind of, I always called it the Marlboro Man. I don't know if you guys saw the television ads for years about the Marlboro Man, do it all yourself. And recognizing how I enjoy helping others and understanding that as a white-haired lady, I can let others help me, and that is a gift to people. It's been a gift to me always to be able to help others. And so thinking in terms of that, I can let, we run this 3-week tour in Indonesia, as many of you know, and the young Adam was his name, and he was, big, healthy, maybe 29-year-old or something like that on the tour. And he said, just put your hand on my shoulder anytime. And then the young girl who we were snorkeling, and she came swimming over to me, grabbed my hand, and swam much harder than I could to go see the turtles. And instead of feeling, oh God, I'm old, they all have a record, it's a recognition that it's a gift to others. So that's my self-care story. It's letting others care for me.
Can I just circle back a minute about the relationship between self-care and grief? Because I think that's really important, and that's something that we really don't do very well, you know, to grieve something all the way through. I just wanna sort of highlight that because, man, it's hard work and a lot of times you get in the middle of, I get in the middle of that grieving of something and crying and just feeling piss poor and think, oh man, why do I have to do this? You know, I just, and yet it's only through doing it that I find a real peace and joy. So just wanted to, yeah.
Yeah, I'm really finding that myself. It's like learning more and more about like, what does it mean to really grieve something, you know, over time, because I'm notorious for like, you know, these days I will dip into it and have some grief, but then like, you know, what's the next thing that arises? All of a sudden my attention is completely fixated. So then I'm back out of it again. And, yeah, I have some great, you know, God is really gracious because I'll do something like step out of it for a moment, get fixated on something and drop a 20-pound piece of wire on, bounce off my head and take out the back end of the car. You know, the car will super. So I just really see more and more like value of staying with this, like that is the challenge. So where the depth in life is.
Yeah, I think that's the greatest act of self-love is staying where we are and allowing that, because I think many of us were taught to not be where we are because it might make others uncomfortable or it might not be productive or whatever the thing is, right?
You're not supposed to, not being a good person or a good girl.
Good girl, yeah.
Good girl.
Yeah, the way you said that. How many times have we heard that?
How can you grieve the past and regrets from the past that still come up in dreams or, you know, I should have done that. And some of the things that have been cropping up are things that happened at work and I've been retired. I think, boy, if I'd handled that differently. And I'm kind of grieving that still. And how do you get over that? I don't know.
Just go through it, Molly.
Yeah.
Keep it on, go through it.
Yeah, I'm not sure we ever get over it. I think we go through it.
Yeah.
It changes, I will say, but you know, if your companions.
And how do you find resolution then? Why? And just going over the same things.
It'll be a surprise.
Okay. Okay.
You'll know it when you see it.
Okay.
I think people grieve differently. The way I grieve might not be the way you grieve. So I know you're sick of hearing about my mother, but when my mother died, I was so sad. I didn't know what to do with it. So since art is my baby, I wanted to know more. I wanted to order her life because I'd heard this piece and that piece. So I said, okay, I'm going to create an album, but I'm a fabric artist. So I said, okay, Claudia, you have to create a fabric album. And I did. And it took me months. I had an art group, and every time the art group came, I showed them 2 more pages of this fabric. And the type of fabric told her story. So when she was in her heyday, she was young and she was single and she had beautiful clothes. The fabrics that I used to create that page were beautiful and, you know, silks and beautiful. And then in her struggling years, I used burlap. But so it was a totally different way of grieving. But by the time it was done, I felt all better.
And that is such a great segue for next week's Lenten video that we'll watch. Yes, creativity and the practice of glory.
Yeah, friends online. So we will get in touch with you, I think, or maybe we'll put it in the Pistol Glory, what we're going to do about a little advanced something to do so that we can integrate you next week better into our celebration piece, our lamentation and celebration practice. Yeah, good segue. So we're going to end with a practice on wonder. Because Valerie says wonder is what brings us back to love. When we're feeling out of love, wonder is what brings us back. So we're going to do a simple practice, but my invitation is take it out with you and use it in the world this week, okay? So just close your eyes if you're comfortable. If not, just soft focus. Take a few deep breaths. And I want you to remember a time when you were young and you felt wonder about a person or maybe an animal, maybe a place. Allow a memory to come up of you as a child in wonder. Once you have your memory, if you would just briefly raise your hand so I kind of know where everybody's at. Okay, let's take another minute to just allow a memory to come up of you as a child in wonder, in the state of wonder. Okay, good. Now what I want you to do is allow yourself to really feel in your body what that was like. So breathe that sense of wonder throughout your adult body right now. Almost like you could breathe it in or you could suck it through a straw from that memory. Bringing that sense of wonder here, present, right now. Just notice, what does my body do in wonder? What does it feel like? Good, and keeping that sense of wonder, open your eyes and just look around the room at our friends here. See if you can gaze around and keep that sense of wonder as you look at others in the room. And if people are hard, look at the flowers over there, trees outside. I'm going to up level us a little bit. So close your eyes again. Go back to your memory if you need it to reinvigorate that sense of wonder. Filling your body with a sense of wonder. Good. And now I want you to imagine someone in your life who's a stranger. Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe it's somebody you see at the grocery store a lot but haven't spoken to yet. Just pull up a stranger in your mind. And gaze on that image with wonder. Good, and allowing that image to go, to fade away. Keeping that sense of wonder in your body. Pull up an image of someone who's challenging for you. Might be a real person in your real life. It might be a politician or someone on TV, someone who challenges you. Pull up an image of them. And just see, can you tap into that sense of wonder as you look at this reflection? And then allow that image to fade away. And just come back to your body in the sense of wonder. This is a gift. This is something that is a God-given gift, the sense of wonder. Just feeling that in your body. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. The invitation is play with that this week if you like. See how you can tap into your sense of wonder when you come upon others.
What if you weren't successful on the last one?
Then you would be like most of us. The practice, it's a practice. Woo! So sometimes I did a little mind for wonder practice with Metta, Buddhist practice, where we really work to hold that with people who are our opponents. So what we often do is work up to that. So you might do, okay, this person was really tough for me. Is there somebody who I feel neutral about? Really practice a lot with somebody I feel neutral about, because these are kind of muscles, right? And then we work up. Is there somebody who is not quite that challenging for me, but is kind of irksome? So we work up to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This isn't easy stuff. It's simple. It's very straightforward. It is not easy. If it were easy, we would all be in love with each other. That's not what I'm seeing.
Every time I sit on this side, I see the sign that God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change these things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I always lead with that, and it's just really good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Charlotte, Carol, thank you. I'm gonna send you each one of these, okay? I'll pop them in the mail for you. Thank you.